Hello, Michaela. How are you doing today?
I'm amazing. How are you today?
I'm also amazing.
Good.
Now that you're here. So quick little brief. Oh, I don't quite know. I don't remember how I found you, but I found you on the interwebs. I think it was Instagram.
Yes, Instagram.
Um, yes. So that's how we know each other. It wasn't TikTok this time. That's where I have found like all of my last people.
Me too. Yes.
Yeah. So, all right. So, when I have someone on the podcast for the first time, I ask them a question similar to this. And it is, what is one thing you know to be true about God and why?
Okay. Wow. Okay. Let's see. One thing I know to be true about God. Hmm. I'm just like jogging my brain of
Yeah, you
what.
can only choose one.
Yeah, the most important thing. Gosh, what's coming to me is I'm seeing. So I had a really profound dream with him
Mm.
when I was first saved, and this dream I was like stuck in hell, and I was kind of going through like this sleep paralysis thing where I couldn't move. I knew I was in hell. It was really deep, dark. It was really scary, and I felt really anxious. And I just felt like there was no hope.
Mm.
And in this dream, I saw this little speck of light in a distance, and just seeing the light gave me a glimmer of hope. And then as the light came closer, I began to feel the warmth all around me. And it looked like the sun, like literally the sun was right in front of me.
Mm.
And as I felt this warmth, my body began to finally surrender and feel peace. And then through the sun began to come the face of Jesus.
Mm.
And so at this time, I'd been praying to God a lot because I always believed in God, but I wasn't sure about Jesus. We talked about this a little bit on my podcast. And so I
Yeah,
prayed, I need to know that Jesus is you, that Jesus is Lord, that Jesus is God. And so this dream, like he came and he showed me like, hey, it's me. And I'm the one that rescued you from this hell that you've been living in.
mm.
Um, and I realized in that moment that he had always been there. And I began to recollect all the moments that he had been there that I had not realized it or rejected
Wow.
him. So just like if you're in a dark place or you've rebelled, or you don't believe right now, like it doesn't matter. Like he's always there. He
That's
never leaves.
good. I freaking love Jesus. He's so good. Oh my gosh. That's a great answer. Oh man. And we always need to be reminded of that.
Yeah,
So, yes, thank you so much for sharing that.
of
Um,
course.
and as she said, as we spoke about before, I was on her podcast recently. So tell the people, a little bit about yourself and about your podcast.
Yeah, so I started my podcast earlier this year. Um, I'm actually wearing the merch for
Yes,
it right now.
he sure
Raising, I wear
is.
this crew neck like every day, but so
Yeah.
raised and redeemed. That's what it's called, and it's because that's really the message of the podcast is the redemption of Christ, how he can completely 180 a person's life. And
Mm.
that's what he did for me. So I really love to have other guests on to share their story and their redemption because I find that it builds my faith for one, to hear other people's stories and to get other perspectives of God and the things that he's done in other people's lives. So yeah, I now have this show where I interview lots of awesome people and I get to learn what they know about God too.
Yeah, really cool stuff.
Thank you.
So, yeah, you talk about a broad range of different things, but I saw in your Insta bio that you also talk about sexual sin.
Hmm.
So that is why I'm having her on the podcast today because she has not been the perfect Christian her whole life, and that is not to shame her, but I think it's important to hear your story because I feel like there's more people like you than those who are, just walking the straight and narrow. So people need to know like they can do what you've done. Like it's not impossible.
Yes. That's why I'm really bold about my story too, is because there's no condemnation in Christ, right? Like when you come to him and you give your life to him, it's like you have this peace knowing the 180 that you've done to where I can talk about the things of the past and not feel shame about it. It is what it is, because I know he's changed me. Like if there's something I'm still struggling with or something I haven't come to resolution with, those are the things that are hard to share about. But knowing how he's delivered me from that past life, like, yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah. Good stuff. So I'm going to start with little baby Michaela. So
Hey.
tell me, what conversations did you have about sex with your parents?
Okay. I actually love that you start there, because if I start with how far the sin went, then it is a little difficult to then backtrack and be like, okay, but wait, what was the psychology she had that led her to that point? So I like that you're starting with baby me, because yeah, it does start there.
Yeah.
So sex was a big deal in my household. I would almost go as far to say that like there was a lot of sexual addiction. And I would even say, like I mentioned to you briefly in the podcast on my show about like these sex demons. And I know my family carried a long line of just everything being about sex. Everything was just super over sexualized. Nobody really talked about it. So it was something nobody talked about it, but I would walk in on it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I saw it, was mortified.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, exactly. So my parents were split up. They got pregnant. Yeah, so they got pregnant with me. My mom was like 17 going on 18. My dad was 21. He just got out of the army. I think he was kicked out, honestly. And so he was a drug dealer. So my dad was like the hustler kind, and my mom grew up with a family that was also addicts, and my dad's family was alcoholics. So she found my dad, fell in love with the bad boy, and it started light with like marijuana, cocaine, stuff like this, alcohol. It later on blew into full-blown addiction, but their life was like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And then they just happened to develop, they created a baby out of that chaos. And so then that's where I came into the picture.
Okay.
Yeah. So my mom ended up becoming a stripper after that. Like she broke up with my dad, left, and didn't really know how to support herself, or she dropped out of high school. So she didn't have any like self-value. She had no idea what she could offer the world beyond her body. So that's what she did. And then that's how she fell into full-blown heroin addiction, was at the club. So she sold herself, sold her body, sold sex. That started, that was in my family line. And my dad, the same thing. Like all of his girlfriends were strippers. My mom was a stripper. Like there was just a lot of sex everywhere in my childhood.
Okay. So you being in the midst of all that, what did you gather from, they didn't even tell you anything, but what did you gather from all that information?
Yeah. I was a really quiet kid. I was really observant. There was a lot of abuse happening too. You mix drugs. Drugs are literally, it's like a form of witchcraft, altering your state, letting these demons in. So a lot of this, just like abuse happened. So I was a really, really quiet kid. And I just tried to stay out of the way. I tried to stay out of my dad's way. I tried to stay out of every, like a fly on the wall. Like nobody sees me. So I didn't really start to process it, I guess, until even much later on. But it did start impacting me from a really young age, because I became very boy crazy. I didn't have my dad's attention because he was all about the next high, the next hookup. So I became very boy crazy too, trying to fill that void. And that's what I thought life was all about. Like that's what they taught me life is all about. So I quietly obsessed over boys because I was too shy to talk to them. So I would write it in my diary. I would draw really sexual kind of pictures as a little kid, like really little, like kindergarten. I would draw these scenes out of stuff happening, and yeah. And
okay,
go ahead.
Sorry, I lost you. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I would draw these scenes out. Like I was, I didn't realize like the programming had started, but I was really boy crazy too. So that's kind of, I really unconsciously um, gathered information on it until
Mm,
later on when I was saved in my early 20s. Like really, it was an unconscious gathering of shaping my identity and my actions and what I valued in life too.
okay. So if the conversations didn't happen with your parents, what can you remember the first conversation you had about sex with anyone?
I feel like it happened at school.
I could see that.
If I were to really,
That was my
yeah, I
first
feel like
encounter.
that's what, exactly. I think there was actually a study done about how most kids hear about sex for the first time with like their peers at school. I know there's supposed to be some kind of like sex education class and stuff like this, but I know we had something like that, but everybody kind of like rushed through that lesson. You know, like there wasn't a lot actually taught on it. It was mostly like talking to my friends about it, um, gathering information from music.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, so music was a big thing that taught me about sex, and then my friends.
Okay. Yes. So do you remember what they taught you? Like, can you think of anything like funny that you learned early on that's like you learned later? It's like, what? That was not even correct.
Um, Actually, I can't. Can you give me an example of something like you would think of in that?
I'm trying to think. Like, I don't know. Kids saying, I don't. It could be something similar to like a kid saying like kids are birthed out of the belly button or something, or like something weird.
No, girl. I knew how it all went down from like from the beginning. Like there was never
Oh yeah,
nobody
you
ever like,
literally saw it. So there's no.
yeah,
Okay, that makes sense.
there was no earmuffs or
Right.
blinders on me. Like I knew exactly what it was.
Mm,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, I knew exactly what it was and how it happened.
Okay, so obviously you know what it was.
Yeah.
But so from growing up in that environment, from hearing different things about your friends' experiences or anything like that, what did you think that the purpose of sex was?
Mm. So I definitely I thought like sex and life purpose were, this is going to sound crazy, but I thought like so much of life was revolved around sex. Like I thought like sex and this pleasure was like the purpose of life almost.
Mm,
Yeah. So there was never like, the godly perspective. It's like sex is love and it's covenant with you and your husband and a reflection of that intimacy that you build. For me, it was not that. It was really like the purpose of life. Like starting at age 12 is actually when I lost my virginity. Um,
wow, that is very
I'm
young.
a baby, a baby. And
Wow.
I was with somebody who was 16 and he was actually my neighbor.
Okay,
And
that happens.
yeah, yeah. And so I had met his sister on the bus or something, and she like hooked us up because he didn't even go to my school because it was some kind of, like parents were separated. He was just there for the weekends type of thing.
Mm,
So he was like my texting boyfriend. And my dad was very on my case. Like my dad was very controlling, but like looking back, like, this was a good area to control me a little bit more in.
hmm
Um, but he had a big problem anytime I would text this boy. I wasn't allowed to see him, in which now that I'm a grown up and now considering like the next stage of having kids, when they start to date and be curious about boys, I want me to be their first source. I want them to
hmm
feel comfortable coming to me to ask questions. I want when they want to go on a date or do something that like I can bring them and I can teach them and I can monitor them, like that they feel safe doing it in my presence so that they can, not sex, but I'm saying like first date,
Being in
first
relationship, yeah.
relationship. Exactly. Because nobody ever taught me how to be in relationship or like what a healthy relationship was. So I went out there and tried to figure it out based on how I saw my parents do it. With no guidance, it had to be secret. I snuck out to see this boy for the first time because we had this whole like almost year-long text relationship. And I thought maybe I was going to have my first kiss, my first like make out that day.
Mm,
And it ended up going all the way. Um, And looking back, it's like at that time I wasn't super ashamed about it. I didn't feel like I was raped necessarily, but coming from an abusive childhood, like you don't know your own boundaries. You don't know how to speak your boundaries. Like you don't know that you even have a say about anything. So I kind of just went with it, and then it happened. And then I really owned it after it happened. And I remember telling my friends in a way, like I was almost proud that it had happened. And I was the first one in my grade. And I think not the first one in the grade above me, but like almost, like I had pretty much like beat everybody in the middle school.
Yeah, that's very young.
Yeah. And so that really started to become my reputation. And at first it was cool. Like at first they thought it was cool. And then I noticed people started to treat me different, and boys started to treat me different. And I felt like way more disrespected. Like that's all guys saw me for, was that then. And all I wanted was, I wanted love. I wanted relationship. I wanted a boyfriend. I wanted somebody to ask me to wear their jersey. Like I wanted somebody to be proud of me. And I'd pretty much thrown that out the window because I gave that part of myself away. And then that's all any young boy could then see me for after that. And that followed me into high school. And that was still my reputation in the high school. And, you know, there was a couple of guys that like I was really, really into, and I would have done anything to be with them. And it was largely just sexual relationships. And I remember like they would date girls, but I wasn't the kind of girl that they would date.
Yeah.
And that broke me because I just wanted to be somebody that somebody would be proud of. And I wasn't that. And so I kept living that way really until then. I moved high schools when I was 16, and I got a fresh start at a new school with my aunt. So I got away from all the chaos. And I remember when I moved here, I was like, okay, I get a fresh start at my reputation, and I'm not going to blow it up this time. And so I really did. And it's not to say I went abstinent at that point, because no, I still didn't know Jesus. God was never really talked about in my household. Especially when I moved in with my aunt, like there's no talk of God or anything. But I remember thinking like, I'll have one boyfriend and I'll sleep with this one boyfriend. Like I'm not, gonna throw myself around like that anymore. And so that's pretty much what I did through high school. And then I went to college, and things changed from
So
there.
before you talk about college, I do want to pinpoint that you didn't know God, and you still understood from a secular viewpoint that I want to only have sex with one person. Yeah. So that's what I like to point out too. Research even shows there's atheists who have done research on the importance of people waiting until marriage and how many benefits there are to that. So there's an understanding already in your mind, and you don't even know God, which I think is beautiful. Like that's not just a Christian thing. People will say like, oh, Christians do this, Christians do that. Everyone wants to be desired by someone and wants exclusivity. That is very normal for humans. And that is literally an example of that, what you just said.
Amen. And I think a big part too is because I realized how much I was hurting myself. And that's what God knows too. Like, that's why God told us how to do marriage and how to do love. Like he doesn't want to see us destroy ourselves. And that's what I did before I knew that his word was true.
Yeah. And that's kind of a question I wanted to ask too. What did you realize before coming to Christ? What did you learn about sex? Like what proved it wrong? Because before you thought like this is the purpose of life, and then you're having sex and what is it then? What did it actually truly end up being?
Okay. So what proved it wrong, and this might sound crazy, but what proved it wrong to me was the darkness that I let into my life through opening these portals of sex. So going back to college was the first time that I ended up in a strip club myself. So when I say saved from sexual sin, it went really far and wide. I followed the same path of my mom, and I didn't think that I had gone too far because I was in college and I'm getting straight A's and I have a full ride scholarship and everybody thinks I'm doing great. But in the nighttime, I'm doing something else. So there was no integrity, because integrity is, when you're the same person in the light as you are in the dark, and I had none of that. And this followed me then I moved to Arizona after that, got really into the new age lifestyle, got really into yoga. I became a yoga teacher. That opened doors to tantric yoga, sexual yoga, sexual magic. A lot of these like healing, I went on lots of these like weekend retreats that were supposed to be healing, like healing of trauma, healing of sexual trauma. But what I realized looking back is it was opening ourselves up in a place where like we're supposed to be safe with our trauma, but it's really just the demonic capitalizing and creating more trauma on that already open wound. So in these spaces, it's like you're trying to be your own healer, and you can't heal yourself. You can't save yourself. And so I ended up in a strip club again, then in Arizona. At this point, I'm engaged. So I'm engaged to another guy. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And our relationship was rooted on sexual sin.
Okay.
So we hooked up the first night, but we were together 4 years. We thought we were best friends. But he was very sexual. He was very like he would flirt with my friends type of thing. And like a lot of them would feel uncomfortable. And so then, when it came point, so at this point, I'm doing all these like sexual magic workshops, weekends. I'm super new age hippie. And so we ran out of money, and that led me back to the strip club then as an engaged person.
Okay.
And he thought it was hot. He would come to the club and get lap dances from other girls. It was just this whole thing. And he didn't know God yet at that time either. I think he's since come to the Lord. But so neither one of us, we were just bringing up all this chaos and not protecting ourselves or each other. So at this club, my relationship with him began to be divided, and we started to split up, obviously. Like, when you're because we would, we still were kind of sleeping around. It was sort of an open relationship dynamic.
That's what I was going to ask you. Okay.
Yeah, it became that. It didn't start that way for the first 3 years, but the last year, and that ended up ruining our relationship. I don't know how people think that they can maintain a lifelong healthy marriage, sharing, the most sacred parts of themselves with other people.
I couldn't do it.
It was a recipe. Yeah, a recipe for disaster, seriously. So I ended up meeting a man at this club who was married, and I was engaged, but I knew I was about to be separated. So when he told me he was separated as well, I believed him because I was projecting my situation onto that. And we started having a relationship. This relationship went on for about a year, and he was a Christian. And I remember being so triggered when I saw the cross around his neck for the first time, because I was like, we are about the goddess over here. Like, I was all about the goddess and, all the feminist kind of new age teachings. And so we would have a lot of religious arguments. And there was a lot of pain and chaos in this relationship too, where, the wife would call and she'd be mad and crying and screaming. And at this point, I believed everything he was saying, that they were separated and she was just having a hard time letting go. And it was a long time coming. I believed all this stuff. And we did tarot cards together. We did shrooms together. The tarot cards were telling us that we were meant to be together. So this carried on until I saw a demon in him. And at this point, I was completely sober when I saw the demon. I had seen the demonic while on psychedelics before, but this time I was completely sober. And I know this isn't exactly what this, Christian sexuality podcast is about, but it all ties in together.
At the end of the day, the Bible says that we battle against spirit, you know what I'm saying? So this is real stuff. And I don't think Americans really understand that that's really what's at work right now.
Exactly. 100%. And just like drugs are a portal opener to the demonic, just like tarot cards, psychedelics, like psychics, all these things are portal openers to the demonic. So is premarital sex.
Tell the people.
The marriage bed is the marriage bed is the only one covered in the blood of Jesus. And so that's what I realized in this relationship, because I saw this demon in him and I felt that this demon wanted me. And I felt that this demon was the driving force to his relationship with me. It's just, I felt so sexually preyed on in this moment of seeing the demon, where like all of my just female anatomy felt scared. I felt like this demon was trying to enter me. And we weren't sexually intimate when I saw the demon, like not in that moment, but like in totality, yes, we were. And so at that point I had started reading the Bible a little bit here and there too, because
so what made you do that?
Christian, right? Yeah. So what made me do that was, so he was a Christian and I was like, I'm going to be with this guy. Like we were looking at houses together. Like it was really serious. I was going to leave the club for him because he was really jealous and possessive and all these things. And I was like, all right, like, I'll do it. And so I was going to leave the club for him. And I wanted to understand, what he believed in. So I'd read all the other books. I'd read the Hindu books. I'd read all these other things. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start to read the Bible. And I'd done that before. Like when I was in college, I read the Bible too, but kind of just from an intellectual standpoint. And so this time I'm reading the Bible to, I don't know, I was open to it. I was a little more open to it, but it was pretty much for him and to understand what he believes, because he was an ex-gangster. Like he was like an ex-criminal. And so he told me how God was the only thing keeping him as contained as he was. He's like, if I didn't believe in God, I would be much worse than I am. And so I was like, okay, I want to understand this, So I
mean, that makes sense. That's true for all of us.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. So I started reading, and the first things that God began to convict me on were about sexual sin. And so that had been on my heart, and it was all like, I can't tell you what exactly happened first, but it was all around the same time that I saw the demon. I feel like my eyes were just opening. And so him and I had both began to feel God tell us that like we needed to be abstinent. So that was like a conviction that was on our heart, is like, because he was going to leave his home, he was going to leave his family, we were going to have a house, we were going to start a new life together. And we both knew like this is huge. So like we need to be abstinent to be sure that this is actually the right thing to do. And it sounds crazy. Look, like now that I'm saved and, I believe the word is true, I look back and I'm like, you were so confused. You were so deceived. Like you had no idea, because I was like, maybe like, we're supposed to be together and we're supposed to get married and we're supposed to have a life together. No, because he was already married.
He sure was.
He was already given to another woman under God. No. So like, it literally felt like every time I saw him, the way I would compare this is like the Egyptian plagues. One time there was a spider outbreak all over the room. That's just like one example. Another time, like this might be TMI, but like I would bleed like every time. Wow. And I don't have a problem with that. And it just felt like we were like facing the Egyptian plagues. Like God was like, let my people go.
Oh my
and
gosh.
It was both of us. Yeah, like both of us, we were both so confused and so deceived. And when you're having sex with somebody, it fogs your ability to see clearly, because you've joined with this person in mind, will, emotion, spirits. They're all intertwining. You can't see clearly if you're still sleeping together. So we knew, baby Christian as I was, because I had started going to church after I saw that demon. I was like, okay, I went and
she said, you know what? I gotta find Jesus quick.
Exactly. So I went to the Catholic Church even, like I got holy water. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I ended up back in a non-denominational Christian church after that. Okay. But like I was not messing around with demons anymore at that point. I became convicted of all the ways I was letting demons in. I was like, like, especially because I lived by myself. And that's
scary.
Me and my dog. And I'm like, okay, I can't be fighting demons all the time. Like we got to guard ourselves. So we began to be very convinced that we needed to be abstinent. And we fell back, we backslid. And, I thought this was an equal pursuit, but then he would come over and I felt like he was trying to conquer me. Like I began to see that, like, this wasn't love. I began to see that he didn't really love me. He didn't really see me as God's daughter. He wasn't regarding me as God's daughter who he wanted to make right before God. No, if he could get me to sleep with him, he still would. It's like he knew what he needed to do, but he wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that I had to do it because if he was too weak, I had to be the strong one.
Amen.
But every time we slept together, I literally felt like I let the demonic back into my life and I couldn't sleep right. My room felt scary. It felt eerie around me. I felt spiritual warfare happening. Like my convictions got stronger and stronger and stronger until I was like dead set on it. And I'm like, we're not sleeping together. And the moment we stopped entirely, it became crystal clear that we were not supposed to be together.
Wow.
I feel like I just went.
Wow. That's good. That's a lot of stuff. That's really good. But I think the point that you made too is for Christian people. I don't want to say Christian women, but Christians in general. You can set out to be abstinent together. But at the end of the day, it's between you and the Lord. And if the person you're with is causing you to sin, you do not need to be with them, especially if they're challenging you and your convictions and your commitment to Christ. That is not someone who's committed to Christ if they have no conviction. So this is a prime example of that.
Exactly. Amen.
So after him, I'm assuming you continued abstinence?
Yeah. That was then my heart's desire after that. So it was really, 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 really hard for me to let that relationship go. Like I had never felt emotions, but it was like destructive emotions. It was like pain, but like I thought pain was love because of the way I grew up. So it took a lot of prayer and getting really rooted in my church and going to women's small groups and having other women like help me and support me and speak truth to me. And without that, I definitely wouldn't have been able to get out of this relationship. But they just began to help me see that God is not the God of confusion. It's not gonna be compromising with his word of, oh, well, maybe this and that. And no, so this relationship literally vanished. Like,
okay, wow.
Vanished. Yeah. And it's crazy because I never even really got closure with him. I think like one of the last times I talked to him was like, he said, let me know if you're ever feeling weak again. And I was like, demonic block.
Ew,
so yeah.
I'm uncomfortable.
Exactly. And I thought we were in love. And I'm like, no, like literally it was just his demons chasing after me.
That is so scary.
Abstinent. Yes. Yeah. So get abstinent and you can see what their true intentions are. And that's what I learned. So after that, I went to like freedom classes at my church because I knew I had all these strongholds and ways of life I needed to break off of me. And yeah, I really tried to not date during that season of my life either, which was really hard for me because I had found my whole identity in relationships and in men. And so during that season, I was like, okay, I just need to spend time with the Lord, figure out who he is, who he says I am. And then I can figure out what I'm actually looking for in a husband.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my trajectory was then I began to figure out the Lord. And I made a list about what I wanted in a man. Now, considering the Bible and considering who Jesus is. And I posted that list on my Instagram story. And that's actually how I ended up meeting my husband.
Well, would you look at that? So before we get into that, I think one of the pivotal things for you was what I'm always pushing on the podcast is healthy platonic relationships. Because that's literally what helped you. You had to find love somewhere else in a healthy way. And a lot of the time we can find that in platonic relationships until the Lord is ready to bless us with a romantic relationship. So it's just another example of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But to continue, as you were saying, then you met your husband. So how much time was that between you becoming abstinent and like really dedicating your life to Christ, and then meeting your husband?
It was almost a year, maybe like almost a year. It actually happened really quick. I know for some people, like, it's just them and the Lord for like a decade. And
That's
like,
me my whole
that's,
life.
what, yeah.
Keep me in your
And for
prayers.
some people, it's like, that's so beautiful too, because it's like he just has so much for you to do. And that's a time of like serving the kingdom more and doing more stuff like that. But for
Yeah.
me, like, I don't know, it just happened to happen like pretty quickly after that.
So
And
did he
I
just
feel
go to
like
your
it's
church,
too.
or?
No. So he lived across the country. He lived in Florida. I lived in Arizona. And when he saw the story of this list, he had began to be curious about being in a relationship too. So
Stop.
He'd never dated, and he was all about work and his career and his goals. He's from a Ukrainian family, so like they live at home until they meet somebody and get married and move out.
Okay.
Like that's the traditional way. So at this point, he'd begun to be curious about being in a relationship. So he was intentionally seeking, but he's very intentional about his life and his goals. So he wasn't about to go sleep around or like have all these meaningful relationships. He wanted something for real. Like he didn't want to, do a lot of the messing around, playing games. He was not about games at all. So he messaged me and he didn't say like, "Hey, that's me on your list." But he was pretty much my list to a T, minus a few things that I've seen grow in him since then.
Okay.
So
what a story.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bless me, Lord.
Well,
So
what I want to say about that real quick is just like how I was so stubborn and I was so rebellious that I feel like the only way I would have come to believe in the Lord was if he showed me something crazy like he did. Like I got to see something really crazy, and that's what brought me to the Lord. And it's not because, I've got this special anything. It's because if anything, I was weaker and more rebellious that he had to give me a burning bush moment to see. And I feel like it's the same thing with me finding my husband is he knows, like God knows the struggles I have. And so he wasn't hard on me. Like he gave me my husband right away. So I didn't have to struggle with those temptations because I'm weak.
And it could be a distraction. Like I've noticed that with some people who get married like quickly, like it is literally marriage is to help you. It's to sanctify you. So that's literally what he knew. That would probably be something that would distract you. So he's like, all right, let's just go ahead and get this out of the way so she can actually focus on me.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that's what I think sometimes. So I'm glad you kind of confirmed that.
Yeah, because I know I would have been so annoying to God about that. Like, I would have been that daughter that he's just like shaking his head out, like, oh, like you know what you're supposed to do. And yeah, so he did me a solid.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so you just told us your whole, not everything obviously in great detail, but everything that you've told us today is a lot. So what did that conversation look like with your now husband?
Like when I told him all these parts of myself?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I told him from the very beginning because I, once again, was not going into the demonic with nobody for nothing.
You've seen too much.
I was like, I've seen too much to go back, So I was straight up from the beginning, like, this is what I've seen, this is what I've done, and this is what I want for my life. And so I confessed, and I'm weird like that. Like, I have to confess everything to feel free. I think that's biblical.
Yeah. It's conviction.
Share it. Exactly. So I shared everything with him right away. And I think that was a big reason I knew he was my husband, is because he was so just accepting. And I felt, so the start of our relationship was on FaceTime. So that's another solid God did for me, because we weren't together. There was no,
you had to build an emotional relationship first.
Bingo.
Look at God.
Bingo. He's so good. He knows what we need.
Love that guy.
So yeah, our relationship started just on those deep, deep talks, revealing all the good, the bad, the ugly. And Yeah, he accepted me for it. And like I said, it was pretty recent after all of that happened that I met him. So when I first came here and got married to him, like everything was great, but I was still healing.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm healing as a married woman and with him. And so in the beginning, there was things that like would almost like haunt me until I would confess it to him. About this ex that I saw a demon in. Like that was a traumatic period of time in my life. So I had to know that I could continue talking to him about that, even now that we're married. And every time I did, I was instantly free of those intrusive thoughts.
Mm.
It's like the moment I brought it to him, and I just see so many times now how our marriage relationship with our husband is symbolic of our relationship with Christ, because
Yes.
I just give him everything. And he even said something to me once of like, I want you to give it all to me, like give it. And like, obviously I need to heal and like seek therapy and not put all that on him. But like, he asked me to give it all to him. Like he wants to take it from me. He like, not to hide, not to ever try to think that I'm alone with it. So yeah. And I feel like I've mostly like, there's always going to be parts that you're healing from, but because we have that kind of open dialogue, I feel finally free of most of that stuff.
Look at God. That's beautiful. Yes.
Yeah.
This is literally the point of marriage. We're seeing it before our eyes. Wonderful stuff. Okay. So for the girls who may be nervous about talking to their husbands or their boyfriend, obviously should be probably before you get married. How did you like start that conversation?
Well, it started on FaceTime, right? For me. So I'm trying to think of like how it even like I just go deep naturally.
You're just like, let me tell you about my sexual history.
Exactly. Okay, so sexual history. I feel like it helps too if it's like, show me yours, I show you mine type of thing of like
Okay.
Tell me like what your situation is, and then somebody opens up and then you open up in return. And
okay.
I feel like we were both just so intentional. I'm trying to think of like what my advice would even be. It's like when you have two willing people and you know what you want and what you want, like in terms of like what's best for you, what God has for you, it's like there's nothing to fear.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
That does. Definitely.
Because if a boyfriend can accept you, like, I don't know if he's going to make a good husband for you.
That's
if
not
he
your
can't
man,
accept,
right?
Like,
yeah.
So like, I would say, yes, tell him sooner rather than later so you can weed it out. That's what I do in relationships. I feel like I overshare, but then it weeds out anybody that's not supposed to be in my life anyways.
Okay.
So,
I guess something practical, I guess I could maybe add to that is just set it up. Like it's very simple. It's not, and I think that's why you're having a hard time to like figure out what to tell them. It's just like, you just have to be courageous enough to know that if this man is for you, however you start the conversation, it's going to go where it needs to go.
Yes.
So
if this man is for you, yes.
Exactly. So literally you could just say, hey, there's something I really want to talk to you about today that's important to me. That's literally how you can start it. And you can start that for many different conversations in relationships. It doesn't have to only be about sex. There's something I want to talk to you. And you could even let him know this is kind of going to be hard for me to say. But I think we need to talk about this. And there it is.
That sets the tone too, so that they know they're going to have to sit and be present.
Exactly. They can't be on the game while you're talking.
Exactly.
So my next question is, what have you seen what has been the difference between premarital sex and sex within marriage for you?
That's good. So we talked about this too, how when you have sex outside of marriage, you're giving the most sacred, vulnerable parts of yourself with no assurance that they're committed to loving you.
Mm-hmm.
So I began to feel that, with the married man that I was with, when we would backslide and, I would still give myself to him, where afterwards I would feel so terrible because I had no assurance that he was committed to me. It's like, I just gave this to you. Like, I feel like I literally chose him before God in those moments. I chose him before God, and I still had no security that he chose me.
That's a word. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So now in marriage, it's like, I'm learning sex in marriage. Like, this is a whole new thing where it just feels like, it's sweet. It's wholesome. It can be silly. Like, I don't know. I literally feel like the sun just like shines on it. Like, where it's like, you don't have to hide. There's no shame. Yeah. So,
and the way that I've heard people kind of explain their experiences before marriage, of premarital sex is like, you feel used, you feel abandoned at times too, because a lot of people know like this is not going to go anywhere. So you have to leave now. So there's no holding each other or reassuring each other of love. It's literally just you are using each other. So I can imagine, if you being in marriage now, it's a completely different experience.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly like you said. I felt like my power was taken from me every time. Like, because you feel needy after that. Like, you're like, are they going to text me? Are they going to call me? Like, when am I going to see them again? Like just like this insecurity, like this needy, anxious insecurity, sex before marriage. Like, that's what it comes with. Like, my power, my integrity, my worthiness was just like ripped out from me.
Yeah. And this is literally,
so now I don't experience.
And good for you. I'm glad to hear that. Hopefully one day I'll join you. But I think that's the beautiful thing. Like, this is why I created this podcast for people like you. Like, obviously you're further along, but people before they get to the point where you're at right now, where they need to know, like, I'm not just saying don't have sex. I'm saying you don't have to feel used. You don't have to feel anxious or abandoned after sex. That's not how the Lord designed it for you. And this is not just a rule for you to avoid pleasure. Like, the Lord is trying to give you the ultimate amount of pleasure. And you explaining it just now, like the sun is shining on you, that you don't have to feel shame. And a lot of women feel those things within premarital sex. And that's the whole point of why Christ is saving it for marriage. So that's why I wanted to ask you that question.
Yeah, that's good. That's real good.
So yeah, I mean, wow, we've talked about so many things. There have been so many things. But is there any like last piece of advice you'd have for women who are struggling with becoming abstinent, and also those who are abstinent right now?
So for those who are struggling to get abstinent, it's like, what I think of is, I was given just such a fear of the Lord, but like, that's a healthy thing. Like, that's a good thing to have, to have a fear of the Lord, and to know what you're sacrificing when you engage in premarital sex. And that's your soul. You're opening your soul up. You're opening up portals to very dark beings that want to come in. And that's enough to make you feel eerie. Like, try to get in the mood thinking about that. Like, yeah, no, like, you're opening the door to something. So, that's my advice, is like, it's a very spiritual, like, there's a spiritual war happening, and you can't risk your soul.
Yeah.
And then who was the second group?
For those who are abstinent, what's your advice for them?
It's kind of the same thing. It's like, you're keeping yourself protected. And also that God knows the desires of your heart and what's best for you and when it's best for you. And I really do believe, like, if you're seeking that spouse, like, he knows. And I believe if you keep praying about it and talking to him about it, that he's a God that likes to provide for our needs, but just when it's best for us.
Yeah. And as you were talking, the verse about how like sexual sin is one of the only sins against ourselves. Like you're literally saying you're opening yourself up to the spiritual realm. You're literally like you just said, you're protecting yourself, and that's why the Bible says you are sinning against yourself when you put yourself in that situation, because you're literally inviting demonic beings into your temple, and that is literally where the Lord is supposed to be, on the altar.
Yeah.
And I know this episode probably might feel kind of dark for some people, but this is real life. And I'm so tired of people like sugarcoating the gospel, because now is the time for us to be like as real as possible and save as many souls, because, we don't got time to be messing around. This is real stuff.
Exactly.
So yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. This has been great.
Of course. So where can the people find you and your podcast?
Yeah, so it's the Raised and Redeemed podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts. It's on Spotify. I'm hoping to get it on some other places, but as of right now, it's on those two main ones.
Okay.
And then I'm on YouTube. It's just Michaela Anikolaenko on YouTube, but I share the video version of the podcasts on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Michaela Anikolaenko on Instagram, TikTok. I'm everywhere. I'm flooding the internet with this information.
Same. We're out there. Yeah. Good stuff. All right. So as you guys know, you can follow the Parallel at the Parallel Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Remember to speak the truth in love, kiss the sun, and I'll be talking to you guys next week. Bye.